My family manipulated me into buying them a $280,000 house with my life savings. But when I discovered, they gave it to my unemployed sister while I paid the mortgage. I let the bank foreclose and left them speechless. I'm 28 years old. I work in tech, making pretty good money, and I still can't believe what my family did to me. I mean, I guess I should be able to believe it because the signs were there for years. But when you're the responsible child, the one who always does the right thing, you don't expect your own parents to basically rob your entire future. But that's exactly what happened. And now that it's all over and I have space to breathe, I need to tell this story because I still wake up some nights with this mix of rage and sadness that I don't know how to fully process. I grew up in a normal working-class family, or so I thought. My dad, Thomas, always had unstable jobs. You know, the kind that lasted 6 months here, a year there, never anything secure. My mom, Carol, worked in retail but didn't make much either. I have a younger sister, Madison, who's 5 years younger than me, and for as long as I can remember, she was the absolute favorite of the family. When I say favorite, I'm not exaggerating. Like she could do whatever she wanted and my parents always found an excuse or justification. I, on the other hand, was the responsible one. The one who got good grades, the one who helped with the bills, the one who basically raised herself because my parents were too busy cleaning up Madison's messes. Madison dropped out of high school when she was like 17. She just decided school wasn't for her, and my parents said, "Well, that's okay. She'll find her way." I had finished high school with honors and was working 2 part-time jobs to save for college because my parents made it very clear there was no money to pay for my education. The thing is, when Madison dropped out of school, suddenly there was money for her to take makeup classes, to try being an influencer, to try selling MLM products. All these things that obviously never worked out but somehow always got funding from my parents. I ended up going to a technical school instead of university, because that's what I could afford. I studied software development and web design, and honestly, it was the best decision of my life, professionally speaking. But at the time, it felt like settling because I couldn't have what I really wanted. I graduated when I was 22 and got a pretty decent job at a local startup. I wasn't making a fortune at first, but it was enough to move into a shared apartment with 2 roommates and start building my life. Madison, meanwhile, was still living with my parents without paying rent, without working, basically being completely supported. Things started to change when I got a better job. Like 3 years after graduating, a bigger company hired me with a salary that honestly I never thought I'd be making at 25. Suddenly I was making good money. I had benefits, I had stability, and I guess my parents saw an opportunity because that's when the conversations about the house started. At first it was subtle. My dad would casually mention that they were tired of renting, that they'd rented their whole lives and had never been able to buy anything of their own. My mom would talk about how nice it would be to have a place where we could gather as a family, something that was ours. And then came the argument that completely destroyed me, that they had sacrificed so much for me, that they had given me a roof my whole life, that the reason they didn't have savings was because they'd spent everything raising Madison and me, and that now that I was in a position to help, it was my turn to give back. You know what it feels like when your own parents make you feel like you owe them your success? Because I didn't ask to be born. I didn't ask them to decide to have children if they couldn't afford them properly. But somehow they made me feel like I was being selfish for wanting to use my money on myself. They bombarded me constantly. Every time I visited them, there was some comment. Every phone call ended with my dad sighing and saying something like, "I wish we could have a place of our own before we die." My mom would cry, telling me they felt like failures as parents because they could never give us a real family home. I broke. They literally broke me down until I said yes. I was 26 years old. I'd been saving aggressively for 2 years. I had like $95,000 saved that I was planning to use as a down payment for my own house eventually. But instead, I ended up using all that money to buy them a house. We found a 3-bedroom house in a decent suburban neighborhood, nothing fancy but nice, for $280,000. I put down the $95,000 as a down payment, took out a mortgage for the rest, and the house was in my name because I was the only one with the credit and income to qualify. But the deal was it was for my parents. They would live there, and eventually they'd pay me back or help me with the mortgage or something. The details were always vague. The mortgage was like $1,500 a month, plus taxes and insurance. It ended up being close to $2,000 a month total. I was still living in my shared apartment, paying 800 inches rent because I couldn't afford a better place after that massive down payment and the monthly mortgage payments. My parents moved into the house, and for a few months everything seemed fine. They visited me, they thanked me, they told me I was the best daughter in the world. Madison was still unemployed and living with them in the house now, but well, at least they weren't paying rent somewhere else anymore, right? Then, Madison started staying at the house more and more. At first my parents said she was just visiting, but then it turned out she'd basically moved into one of the bedrooms. Okay, I thought, she's their daughter. She lives with them. Whatever. But then I started noticing weird things. When I visited the house, sometimes my parents weren't there, but Madison was. One weekend, I went without warning, and Madison was there with a group of friends having a party. And when I asked her where Mom and Dad were, she told me they'd gone away for the weekend. And that seemed strange to me. But I didn't think much of it yet. The bomb dropped like 6 months after they moved in. I went to the house on a Tuesday afternoon because I needed to pick up some mortgage documents I'd left there, and the house was basically empty of my parents' stuff. The master bedroom no longer had their clothes, their personal photos weren't on the walls, and Madison was there watching TV like nothing was wrong. I asked her what happened, and she told me, very casually, "Oh yeah, Mom and Dad moved out like 3 weeks ago. Didn't they tell you?" They hadn't told me anything at all. I called my mom immediately, and she answered like nothing had happened. I asked her why they'd moved out of the house. I bought them with my life savings, and she said they'd found an apartment closer to her work that was more convenient, and that since Madison needed a place, it made sense for her to stay in the house. I said, "Mom, that's my house. I'm paying the mortgage. You can't just give it to Madison." And she responded with, "Well, technically the house is yours, so it shouldn't matter to you who lives there as long as the mortgage gets paid." I was absolutely furious. I told her that if Madison was going to live there, she needed to pay rent or at least contribute to utilities. My mom said Madison didn't have a job and that I was her sister and should support her. My dad got on the call and started with the same old speech about sacrifices and family and blah blah blah. I told them this wasn't what we'd agreed to, and my dad said, "What exactly did we agree to, Sophia? That you'd buy a house for us and we'd live there? Well, one of us is still living there. What's the problem?" The problem was everything. The problem was that I was paying $2,000 a month for a house I wasn't even living in, while my 3-year-old sister, at the time, who had never worked a day in her life, was living there for free like it was her personal mansion. My parents had found a 2-bedroom apartment they were renting for like $1,200 a month, which meant they were basically living cheaper than before, while I was carrying a massive mortgage. I tried to be reasonable. I messaged Madison directly and told her that if she was going to live in the house, she needed to get a job and start contributing. She told me she was looking for work but hadn't found anything yet. 2 months passed, then 3, then 6, and Madison was still unemployed, still living in my house for free, and my parents defended her every time I brought it up. My mom told me I was being cruel to my sister, that Madison was going through a hard time. What hard time? Living for free in a nice house? That I had a good job and could afford to help my family. Things got worse when I discovered that the whole time I'd been sending extra money to my parents, thinking I was helping pay down the mortgage faster, like $500 extra a month that supposedly went straight to the principal of the mortgage so we could finish paying it off faster. I checked the mortgage statement, and those extra payments had never been applied. I called the bank, and they confirmed they'd only received the minimum payment each month. I confronted my parents, and after a lot of pressure, my dad finally admitted they'd been using that extra money for their rent because with his unstable job situation, they couldn't make ends meet. So not only had they taken my house and given it to my sister, but they were also stealing $500 a month from me, telling me lies about the mortgage. They'd been doing this for almost a year. $6,000. They basically threw in the trash while I lived in a shitty apartment with 2 roommates who left dirty dishes for days and never cleaned the bathroom. That's when something broke in me. My whole life I'd been the good daughter, the responsible one, the one who made sacrifices, the one who put family first. And for what? To be treated like an ATM? So my useless sister could live better than me with my own money? So my parents could lie to my face and make me feel guilty for wanting to set basic boundaries? I sent them all a message, group text, very clear. I told them they had 2 options, Madison got a job and started paying at least $1,000 a month in rent, or she moved out of the house in 30 days. My parents exploded. They called me selfish. They told me I was destroying the family. My dad even told me I was an ungrateful daughter after everything they'd done for me. Madison put a post on Facebook without mentioning me directly, but obviously about me. About how some people change when they get a little money and forget where they come from. The 30 days passed and Madison supposedly got a job at a coffee shop. She started paying me $400 a month, nowhere near the $1,000 I asked for. But my parents begged me to accept that while she got established. I accepted like an idiot, thinking at least it was something. 2 months later, I found out from a cousin that Madison had quit the coffee shop job after 2 weeks because the manager was rude to her. That was the moment I just gave up. I stopped fighting. I stopped arguing. I stopped trying to reason with people who were clearly never going to see me as anything more than a source of money. And I made the most liberating and terrifying decision of my life. I simply stopped paying the mortgage. I didn't warn them. I didn't give them an ultimatum. I just stopped sending the payment. The first month, the bank sent me a late payment notice. The second month, they called me. The third month, they sent me a pre-foreclosure notification. Madison called me hysterically asking what was happening because she'd received a letter from the bank at the house. I told her that if she wanted to keep living there, she could take over the payments. That the house was in my name, but if she wanted to keep it so badly, go ahead, make the payments. Of course she didn't. My parents didn't either. They bombarded me with calls and messages saying, how could I do this to them? That I was being vindictive, that I was going to ruin my credit, like I cared about my credit at that point. I'd already lost practically all my life savings. I told them to have the same energy they had when they decided to move out and leave the house to Madison without consulting me. I told them I'd done my part buying them a house, and they'd decided on their own to do whatever they wanted with it. So, now, I was deciding on my own to stop financing their experiment in seeing how much they could take advantage of me. The house went into official foreclosure 4 months after my last payment. Madison had to move back in with my parents to their rental apartment, where now 3 adults were sharing 2 bedrooms. The bank sold the house at an auction for quite a bit less than it was worth, obviously, because that's how foreclosures work. My credit was destroyed. I lost my entire down payment. I lost 2 years of mortgage payments. I basically lost over $130,000 altogether. But you know what? It was the best money I ever spent, because I bought my freedom. I bought the clarity of seeing my family for exactly what they are. My parents sent me some messages after the sale, trying to make me feel guilty, saying I'd humiliated the family, that Madison was devastated. How was I going to live with that decision? I answered them once, telling them I'd lived 26 years trying to earn their love and approval by being the perfect daughter, and I'd finally understood. It was never going to be enough, because they didn't want a daughter. They wanted a benefactor, and that from that moment on, they no longer had either. I haven't spoken to them in almost a year. Some relatives took their side, mainly because my parents told them a very edited version of the story where I simply stopped paying for the house on a whim and left my poor sister on the street. Other relatives, the ones who know the full story, support me or at least don't get involved. Madison apparently works part-time somewhere now, but from what I heard, she barely lasts a few months at each job before quitting. My parents had to move to a cheaper apartment, because with Madison living with them again, they couldn't afford the 2-bedroom one. Me? I moved into my own apartment, a small 1-bedroom that costs me $1,400 a month, but it's mine, where nobody makes me feel guilty, where I don't have roommates leaving their mess everywhere, where I can close the door and know that everything there I paid for myself. I'm rebuilding my savings little by little. My credit is slowly improving. I got a raise at work that helps. And most importantly, I set boundaries I never thought I could set. I deleted my parents from social media. I stopped answering calls from family numbers I don't recognize. I started going to therapy to process all this shit, because it turns out, growing up as the responsible child in a dysfunctional family leaves you with a lot of trauma to work through. Do I regret buying the house? Every single day. It was the stupidest decision I've ever made in my life. But it was also the most expensive and most valuable lesson. That you don't owe your family anything just for sharing DNA, that love shouldn't come with a bill attached, and that sometimes the only way to save yourself is by letting everything fall apart. Last week was my 28th birthday. My parents didn't send me a message. I didn't expect them to. Madison didn't either. I spent the day with real friends, people who love me without expecting anything in return, and it was the most peaceful birthday I've had in years. I made a wish when I blew out the candles that anyone who's in a similar situation finds the courage to set boundaries before losing as much as I lost. Because yes, I lost money, I lost my credit, I lost my family, but I gained something that's priceless. A certainty that I'll never again let anyone make me feel like my value is in what I can give them, and that, honestly, is priceless.